Welcome to Basic Brewing Radio for Thursday, November 15th, 2012. I'm James Spencer. Here at Basic Brewing Radio, we're all about home brewing. For this week, envisioning holiday beers with Gordon Strong. The three-time Ninkasi Award winner shares his latest recipe for a Christmas beer and walks us through the process he used to create it. If you're new to home brewing and would like to get into the hobby for the first time, check out our website, basicbrewing.com, where you can find archives of all our audio and video podcasts and our DVDs to walk you through basic and more advanced brewing techniques. You can follow me on Twitter. My username is Basic Brewing, all one word. Also, you can find me on Facebook at facebook.com/basicbrewing.james, and our show page on Facebook is at facebook.com/basicbrewing. Thanks again to everybody clicking on the Amazon.com associate link on our basicbrewing.com site. You know how it works. Whenever you think of Amazon, don't go to Amazon first. Go to our website first, basicbrewing.com. Click on the Amazon link on the right-hand side of the page, and when you click on that, you'll be taken to Amazon, and you will shop as normal, but the only difference is that you'll be helping us to bring you this show when you do that. We greatly appreciate your support. And we hope that you'll think about us during the upcoming holiday shopping season. Also, we have associate links for Brew Your Own magazine and the American Homebrewers Association on our site, too. You can find our Basic Brewing iPhone and Android podcast apps on their respective stores, and the Android podcast app is also on Amazon.com. We're also on the BlackBerry podcast directory, and we're on the Stitcher app as well. Gordon and I talked for a long time, a good long time, and answered your questions from Facebook and Twitter, so I want to get right to it. But first, a couple of things. I'll be taking next week off to be with my family and overeat in celebration of Thanksgiving, but I'll be back the week after. Also happening the week after Thanksgiving is the release of the new edition of the Basic Brewing Brewer's Logbook. This year, Steve Wilkes and I have taken a new approach. We're making it a perpetual logbook. In other words, we're not tying it to a specific year. You'll still have a year's worth of calendar pages in the front and room to log 50 batches in the back, but the calendar pages will be blank. So no matter when you buy the book, you can start with the month you get it and have a full year of space to track your brew. In other words, if you pick up a copy in July, then your sort of physical year of brewing will start in July. Also, we've added a table of contents on the inside cover that you can use to enter your brews, so you won't have to leaf through the entire book to see if the beer you're looking for is in that book, like I have to do all the time. And you'll have the page number right there, so you can go right to it. Very excited about that. It's at the printers now, so look for that early in the week after Thanksgiving. And please tell Santa. Now let's go to our chat with Gordon Strong. He's won the National Homebrew Competition Ninkasi Award 3 times. That's more than anybody else. He's the highest-ranking judge in the Beer Judge Certification Program, and he's the principal author of the BJCP Style Guidelines, so he knows a bit about beer. And he's put a lot of that knowledge into a book called Brewing Better Beer, Master Lessons for Advanced Homebrewers. Well, Gordon Strong, welcome to Basic Brewing Radio.
Thanks, James. Glad to be on.
Now, the name of the book is Brewing Better Beer, Master Lessons for Advanced Homebrewers. So I take it from that title that this is not the one that if you think, hey, I might want to brew beer someday, this is not the book for you.
No. It's what I mean by advanced homebrewers is basically people who are brewing all grain already, or who are ready to go to all grain. Because I don't really cover the initial steps in how to brew, because let's face it, I mean, how to brew has already been written. So
there's a book of a similar title.
Yes, so go read that one, work on it a while, and then take a look at mine.
Yeah, I've got to tell you that when I first got the book, I saw that and I was like, wow, there's yet another book on brewing beer. What's Gordon going to say that's different from designing great beers and radical brewing and how to brew and brewing classic styles and all these other books that are already out there that are wonderful books? How did you approach the topic that's different from what's already out there on paper?
Well, while they're all good brewing books, I don't think any of them are really targeting all grain brewers. I mean, they'll have a big section on extract, or the recipes will be written for extract brewers, or they'll cover a lot of the introductory stuff. Um, where I wanted to focus on more the decisions that you make once you sort of understand how to brew. How do you really start driving the train yourself rather than sitting in the back and going wherever the conductor's taking you. So um, the actual steps that I'll take you through are what I think are the important choices that a brewer makes when they're trying to improve their beer, improve their system, drive towards a certain outcome. Um, so that's kind of different, and it's really I'm not trying to get people to brew like I brew, but to go through the process that I went through to decide how to get my own brewing style. So in a way, it's more like how you go about learning to get to the highest levels of any kind of subject matter. So hopefully people that are at that advanced level can use that to get to the top of their game. But it's just basically packed with handy tips. The things that I go through when I brew, um, that I think people have a lot of practical advice that they could put into use in their existing process. So you don't have to you don't have to ditch whatever it is you have been doing. You can sort of pick and choose from the different things that I talk about and apply it. And I've gotten some very good feedback from people who go in open-minded and do just that. The most frequent comment that I think I get is that, wow, it really made me rethink my entire brewing process.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, good, that's exactly what I was hoping.
Yeah, I think a lot of times we can get so focused on doing the same thing, getting in our rut and getting into the, I got to brew. That means I've got to do this and I've got to do this and, I got to remember to do that. And if you've done it for a while, you get to thinking in your own channel. You get stuck and you don't step back and think, now, why am I doing that? And this book, I think, lets you kind of step back and see the way you think, and kind of then the brewer gets to see the way he brews in a different way. Does that make sense?
It does, and that's kind of how I hope people would use it. I mean, a lot of people that are just looking for the sort of quick wins will go through and they'll find things they might not have seen before. Because I'm not afraid to name names in the book. When I tried to write it in a very conversational style, like we're hanging out, we're brewing a batch of beer, and you're just asking me the kinds of questions that you would have, because that's really where a lot of the material came from. Is I thought to all the times I've brewed with people, and it's like, well, what do they seem to be interested in? What do they want to know? What is it that they haven't learned elsewhere? How can I help? So I think what a lot of the other books, they're afraid to sort of take a firm position on something, or go into the details of, well, I like this brand of malt better than this other brand, and here's why, or something like that. To actually go into that and tell you, here's what I think. I don't think you see that in many other books. So, agree with me or don't agree with me about it, but understand that you should develop these opinions yourself based on your own system and what you're trying to brew and your own experience.
Yeah, you give a lot of nuts and bolts. I mean, there is a lot of step-by-step hints and tricks and tips and recipes to illustrate those. But also, what I like is the kind of bigger picture. In fact, you have a section on philosophy.
Yes.
So brew good beer you must. It's kind of like a
Yeah. For those of us of a certain age, you sort of cringe when you hear Zen and the Art of anything.
Yeah.
But that was another comment that I got from people that were familiar with it. Wow, it's very introspective. It causes you to think about this. Like, well, I actually had this experience. I was in Australia. I know you've done some things with them recently with their national competition. 2 years ago at the conference, Randy Mosher and I were the guest speakers, and we both gave a number of talks. And it was very interesting because I kind of have an engineering background, and Randy has an artistic background, and I was listening to us describe, without any sort of coordination, the same thing, but he was using all these terms that came from the art world. He was using contrast and balance and counterpoint, and I was using more of these engineering related terms. And it was very interesting because we were really viewing the same thing through the lens of our own experience. And I thought that was fine, because too often when people read a book or hear somebody talk, they say, well, this person says the only way to brew is, and then whatever it is they're saying. And I'm saying, no, it's not like that at all, because I know so many people that brew great beer that brew completely differently. So how did those people get to all those different places to make great beer? It can't be because they're following, one pattern of brewing, but they went through similar steps on that own personal journey to get to be great brewers. So I was trying to capture that in the book as well. So, you can read the book sort of at the superficial level and get the tips, but then you can sort of almost use it as the sort of life coach kind of system to really do the deep thinking. So I think another comment I got from people was that, you say it's for advanced brewers, but really, there's a lot of intermediate stuff in there. Don't sell it short on people that are moving up from extract. When they're ready to start thinking about all grain, that's a good time to look at the book too.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Now, the reason that I said, I got to talk to Gordon. I've been looking for a good reason to get together with you. And the other day, as if I need a reason, but anyway, I saw you tweet about holiday beers the other day, and I said, there it is. I got to talk to Gordon about that, because we're coming up on the holidays, and I want to talk to you about the recipe that you developed for this year's holiday. But I also want to take some questions from Twitter and from Facebook. I tweeted out there, or I asked for questions. Like, for instance, I got responses from Twitter from St. Aardvark. Is it too late to start a holiday beer now? I have the impression that they're all about high gravity and a long rest. So, it's too late for Thanksgiving, but is it too late for Christmas and Hanukkah and the end of the year?
You could probably make a session Thanksgiving beer. But honestly, the recipe I gave you, I brewed on October 28th. So that was, last weekend. So I brewed my Christmas beer for this year at the end of October, and that was a 1070 beer.
Wow.
Something that'll wind up being roughly 6.5% thereabouts. So, no, holiday Christmas beers don't have to be huge, over-the-top things. They can be, but in that case, you probably ought to start them like a year ahead of time.
So they don't. They don't really holiday. When you say holiday beers, it's such a wide. There's not a BJCP category for holiday beers, right?
There is one for Christmas beers. It's I think 21B. It's a variety of spice beers.
But when you say holiday, that could be just about anything.
Yeah, holiday. When I say that, I really am talking winter seasonal beers.
Right.
So, we're past the pumpkin beers. I made my pumpkin beer this year, and hopefully I'll be finishing that up, drinking that around Thanksgiving time. And then the Christmas beer ought to be coming on. But really, the concept of Christmas beer, you have to step back and start envisioning what is it that you want to make. And I think the first kind of decision to make is which country's Christmas type beer are you interested in? And I think there's a difference between how the Belgians approach it, how the British approach it, and how Americans approach it. So, mine was basically an American Christmas beer that had some sort of English character to it. But
so let's start talking about this beer, and
Yep.
and I want to tie it to the chapter in the book called "Envisioning Your Beer." Now, that's what do you mean by envisioning your beer?
That's the sort of philosophical way of getting around recipe formulation. But it's maybe two big steps before recipe formulation, because it's kind of understanding what it is you want to brew and what it's like, and what purpose you're brewing it for, and whether you're trying to match a certain style or a profile, or are you cloning something, or you're just trying to make something that suits your tastes. Who are you going to serve it to? When do you need it? That kind of thing. Start making the rough decisions that are going to influence the subsequent choices you make for your beer. So, as like your Twitter respondent said, is it too late to brew like a really big beer? Yeah, it's too late to brew a really big beer, but not all holiday beers have to be really big beers. So, if you want to have it this year, don't go for a 9 or 10% beer. Look for in the 5 to 7 range, and you'll be fine.
So part of envisioning your beer is kind of like what you do when you're, say, building a house or doing a project like that. If you look at the goal at the end, and then, there are all kinds of constraints that come into and factors that come into the planning process between here and there, and one of those is time, of course. And there's also a fermenting temperature. If you don't have a temperature control, there's also that. There's availability of ingredients. There's all kinds of things that go into that may constrain what you wind up with at the end.
Right. I don't think I could have said it better. That's basically what you have to look at. Is you have to play the hand that you're dealt. So when you take those constraints, if you start trying to force it outside of what is sort of directly possible, you could get worse results, or you have to spend more work to get that done. If you can't get certain ingredients, some yeast that you might want to use are only available as seasonal offerings from the suppliers, and if you're heart set on getting that, okay, if you find it, it might be out of date. So is using old yeast really going to help you get your objective? Or could you use something fresher that is comparable?
Or if you could try to take that old yeast and through a series of starters, build up a healthy culture or a healthy supply. But then again, that's going to take time as well.
Yeah, and it's got a lot of downside to it. And if you're planning on brewing, you're doing this planning in parallel, probably with trying to get your yeast ready. So what do you do when it's brew day and you look and your yeast starter hasn't done anything? You got to be ready for plan B or C.
That packet of USO5 in the fridge. That's what.
Actually, I've had kind of to name names, and I hadn't used Y yeast in several years. I'd been using the White Lab stuff, and I'd always make a starter. But since Y yeast sort of switched to the big packs, the old smack pack, you smack it and it swells in a couple of hours, and you can haul it out of the fridge the morning of brewing, and it's good to go by the time you're done. So I've been happy with just doing that since they've gone to sort of pitchable quantities.
Right. So let's take a look at the Christmas 2012 beer.
Yep.
What was your vision for the end product?
So, in the American style, so I'm looking at a spiced beer. And when I want to do a spiced beer, I'm usually thinking in the amber to brown range. I'm not looking for a really pale beer, and I'm also not looking for a really dark beer. Because I kind of like the flavors I get out of the kinds of malts that I would use that produce things in that color range. I also don't want to have clashes between too much of the darker malts and the spices.
Mm-hmm.
So, this thing is, a coppery brown kind of beer, I think I'm looking for. So, really what I'm looking for is maltiness that has some depth to it, that has some chewiness, some flavors, and that has, kind of a sweeter finish, something that's going to feel a little heavier, something that, might be appropriate for sipping in cold weather.
So right there, you're talking about your malt bill. You're talking about a starting gravity. You're talking about an attenuation level. You're talking about a finishing gravity. If you're talking about, sweetness, all those are kind of, by those descriptors, you're setting parameters around what the recipe's going to hold, right?
Yeah, and it's also an IBU level. I mean, when you're talking about sweetness, that's kind of a proxy for the final gravity or whatever sort of residual sugar is in it. But depending on how many bittering hops you throw at it, that can come across as sweet or bittersweet or bitter.
Mm-hmm.
So that kind of balance. I mean, I want the finish to be sort of malty. I want it to be warming but not burning. And I don't want the spices to get stepped on or have clashing qualities there.
So what's the next step?
Well, trying to get the sort of the target gravity range will kind of tell you the total weight of the grist or the fermentables that you're using. So I kind of think about that and then start laying in percentages or I think, what do I want for base flavors? What do I want as the sort of the accent flavors, and how do I go about getting the kind of the residual sweetness? So I made several choices in this recipe based on those goals. So for base malt, I'm using a combination of Golden Promise, Dark Munich, and it's a German Dark Munich and Belgian aromatic malts. And really the Golden Promise is just something that I had an open bag of. I probably could have used a lot of other pale ale malts, but I wasn't looking for something excessively bready. So I don't know that I would have chosen Maris Otter. If I had chosen malt, I might have thrown some Victory or Biscuit at it to give some of that breadiness. But really, just like a pale ale malt that's got some character to it. Dark Munich can give it a malty richness, and likewise for the aromatic. So I'm really sort of laying down that when you taste the beer, you're going to go like malty. I also threw some flaked barley at it for body, because I feel kind of strongly that these beers shouldn't be thin tasting.
Mm-hmm.
So those were the first choices I made in the grist, and then I hit it with some accent flavors. I used some pale chocolate, some English dark crystal malt, and some sort of medium level Belgian crystal malt. So looking for lightly toasty, kind of fruity, sweet, and caramelly flavors to go with it.
And there was a handy tip. One of the tips that I'm going to start using is that you don't put the darker malts in the mash with the rest of the grains, right?
Yeah, that's probably one of the, if there was such a thing as a Gordon method to brewing, this is kind of it. Is I tend to only mash the paler malts, things that actually need to be mashed um, during the main sacrification rests. I don't add things like crystal and roasted malts at that time because they they've already been converted. If you're an extract brewer, you'd have been steeping them anyway.
Mm-hmm.
So why do you have to do that now? And really, what that lets me do is simplify my water salts. I don't have to go through all the you know adding a bunch of chalk to neutralize the dark malts. I just leave all that out. I tend to brew with fairly low ion water. I use RO water actually that I buy from the grocery store. And I usually just add a little bit of calcium chloride to give me some available calcium during the mash to help the conversion. And that's it. And then I treat the water with a little bit of phosphoric acid to get it to the 5.5 range before I start. Um, and then when I'm mashing out after the mash is done, that's when I'll throw in all the sort of if you were an extract brewer, what you would have called steeping grains.
Right.
And get the flavors and colors out of it. Because I'll do like a 15-minute recirculation and then, the sparge and lauter.
And then you don't get a lot of the harshness that you might get otherwise.
Exactly. That's the point. It's the analogy that I use is it's the difference between a freshly brewed pot of coffee and one that's been sitting on a burner for 2 hours.
Yeah,
The long
that's a brilliant analogy.
it pulls out bitterness and acidity and just it's a nasty flavor. So I find you get like purer, cleaner flavors. Plus, it doesn't throw off your mash chemistry. Because I found what a lot of people seem to be doing was, they're adding all this junk to their water, all these chemicals to their water to offset all these dark malts they're adding to their mash that don't, and neither of them needed to be there. So rather than adding one thing to offset another, why not just leave both of them out? Put them in later. So really all you want to do is drive the mash to a decent pH range, let conversion happen, and then add in your other malts, and that comes through. And the benefit of that is like a smoother flavor in your dark malts. So yeah, check it out. That's one of my it's kind of one of my favorite tips.
So for those who are stressing because we're not talking details about the recipe, with your permission, I'll post this in the description of this episode on the website.
Oh yeah, sure.
And in the app as well. So now we can just talk theory, and you don't have to stress about the.
Yeah, it's as you go. Right. Yes.
But you're not done with the fermentables. That's the grain, but you're not done with the fermentables yet.
Yeah. So I also like to add in some honey, and I also added some black treacle, which is it's kind of like, or maybe it exactly is, kind of like a blend of blackstrap molasses and Lyle's golden syrup, but it's that thing you get from England in a can. You could certainly use molasses or whether it's the normal molasses or the blackstrap. Blackstrap tends to be kind of dark tasting, but that's actually something I was kind of looking for in this recipe.
So do those sugars add some dryness to the balance?
I add them at the end of the boil because I don't want to drive off a lot of their flavor. I mean, yeah, I mean they will ferment, but they won't ferment completely. So you'll get some flavor, you'll get some additional sweetness. Um, but I tend to think they stay around and they give it kind of a more rounded flavor. I think if you tried hard, you could get them to ferment all the way out. But if I was really just trying to, dry it out like you would with like an IPA or something, I just would have used white sugar and been done with it.
Hmm.
Here I'm actually trying to get the character of those fermentables. I really kind of like some honey in a Christmas beer, and I would like that flavor just to sort of stay with it. I mean, if you think about the Stillenacht from Belgium, I mean they prime it with honey, and you can taste it, and that's really one of the nice things about that beer.
So hops, what are you thinking hops wise?
Hops, I'm thinking, do no harm, stay out of the way, uh, you know, take a back seat. So, somewhere in the 25-30 IBU range. I was just using um, some English bittering hops that I had. But at that point, it doesn't matter. You're looking for IBUs without adding a lot of flavor. So I would avoid things that had a lot of sort of harsh, I wouldn't use Chinook or something that would, have more of a flavor carryover. And I use some Styrians late, but it's not really a hop-driven beer. You want a little bit of character. I mean, you could think like a Belgian, the kinds of things they use late. So like Styrian or Saaz or Hallertau or any of those kind of things to give it a sort of a late hop character. But I would tend to avoid the sort of the citrusy type hops.
And of course, since it's a Christmas beer, since it's holiday beer, everybody runs to the spice rack. Uh,
Yeah. This is where you get a lot of individuality, and it's also where like a lot of beers go to die. I mean, you have to be careful, and I've made my share of mistakes with these kind of beers. If you overspice something, yeah, it can age out, but it often takes years.
hmm
So, you know, that's okay if you want to vintage date it and lay it down, but if you want to drink it this year, that makes it a little harder. So, my philosophy on spicing is, go on the subtle side. If you're going to make an error on the subtle side because you can always adjust it upwards later, and there are techniques for doing that. So, mostly in this one, I was looking for a combination of things that kind of remind you of the holidays, whether it's um, potpourri or whatever sort of favorite holiday cheer kind of things. I like to use some warming spices, the cinnamons and things like that. Um, this recipe, I was using a little ginger in it to see what that would do. That's kind of a newer addition. So I know one of my favorite beers is from Great Lakes, their Christmas ale, and they use ginger and cinnamon among other things. So I thought I would give it a shot in this one and see how it turns out. So I'm using kind of a lot of things: cinnamon and nutmeg, allspice, some coriander, the ginger that I mentioned. But I also give it some things that tend to round it out. I really kind of like vanilla, and I was using the fresh beans. And there's also some fresh orange peel in there.
So how did you treat the spice?
Um, well, I use fresh spices and whole spices. I'm a fan of spices that you buy from Penzeys. You can look them up online, Penzey. Um, but I'll get the whole spices, and like a nutmeg. It's this round nut looking thing, and you kind of give it a rough chop, The coriander seeds, you can just sort of give a light crush to the back of a pan or the underside of a glass or in a mortar or pestle. Cinnamon sticks, you kind of break them up. Vanilla beans, with a paring knife, you sort of split them and then you scrape out the sort of the black gooey seeds. Orange peel, use a zester. Make sure you just get the outside orange part. Don't get the white pith because that's bitter. Ginger, I just gave a rough chop. And I threw it in a very tight meshed bag like you'd use for steeping hops or grains. And I put that bag of goodies in and the last 5 minutes of the boil. And after knockout, I just let it steep another 5 before I pulled it out. I think I wouldn't go any longer than 5 minutes in the boil, because the volatile oils, they'll just all blow off.
Right.
You really are going for flavor here, but you want some of the aroma to persist. But it's kind of easier to fiddle with the aroma later.
Then what about yeast?
That's what this one I just used 1318, the London 3 English yeast. But I think I'm not looking for a lot of yeast character in this with all the spices. I wouldn't want that to clash. So if I was using kind of a Belgian yeast or something, I would cut back on the number of spices if it was going to create some of its own.
And then I assume this is destined for a keg.
Yes. Yeah. It's. I'm staring at it sitting here in the carboy right now. I need to take a gravity reading and see if it's done. The airlock seems to have settled down, so it probably is. Looks like it's actually fairly clear, so maybe I'll do that this weekend.
So what ABV are we looking at?
Well, it started at 1070, and I would expect it to be in the 1020 plus or minus 2, probably. I expect that there would be some residual sweetness. If some of that fermented out, that would probably be okay too. So, that's kind of my target, but I'll take it a reading and see where it is. Sort of targeting around a 6.5. Or between 6.5% and 7% beer.
That sounds really nice.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. The test in this batch, I think, was adding the ginger in to see, is that going to play well with the other spices or whether it's going to be too much. So I'm kind of not sure on that. So I'll see at the end. But really, and I saw some questions on how you use spices, and yeah, there are different ways. So I would either recommend doing what I did, or doing another thing that I often do, which is, brew the beer, let it ferment out, to the point where you're ready to keg it or package it, and then take those the same spices and basically make a tea out of them. So, I would take them and leave them in the mesh bag, boil maybe a cup of water, and then pour the boiling water onto the spices and let it steep for between 2 and 5 minutes, like you were making a cup of tea. And you can sort of dunk the bag a little bit as you go, and then kind of chill it down and cap it or whatever. And then you basically have this liquid that you can use to go back and dose your beer. That's why it's a good idea to sort of do it when you're still in a bulk stage. So it's kind of handy in the keg because then it's off the yeast, and if you want to shake it up to make sure everything's mixed, you don't have to worry about winding up with a cloudy beer at that point.
So let's answer some of these questions. We had a lot of good questions, some of which we've already addressed probably. David Mast says, Have you had a holiday beer, commercial or homebrew, which was neither spiced nor big, a barley wine or old ale, and therefore what made it a holiday appropriate beer?
Uh, yes, I have. The I mean, what makes something a holiday beer, I think, is it has to remind you of the season. It tends to be warming or heavy. But warming, I mean, you can get warming at 5.5% alcohol. It doesn't have to be that big, especially if you're doing an English style beer. I mean, English Christmas beers traditionally aren't spiced. They'll be using, a variety of sugars and other grains and such to get a lot of the interesting flavors. Um, so you can certainly find English beers that are not big and not spiced. Um, American beers do traditionally tend to be spiced. If you find Belgian beers, generally when a Belgian brewery says they're doing a winter beer or a Christmas beer, it's usually just a variation of whatever one of their mainstream beers is that's brewed, 1 or 2% stronger, and it might be a little darker. It might be a little bit more fuller in body. Um, they might spice it, but they tend to go light.
Jeff Greer asks, ideas for session holiday beers with time to sit and visit with friends and family. Session makes sense, and depending on how dysfunctional, I'm adding this part, depending on how dysfunctional your family is, it might be might be better to have some lower alcohol beers around. So, I mean, if you do say make a lower alcohol version of a traditional Christmas or holiday beer, what are some factors that you've got to think about as far as balance goes?
And that's a nice idea. I would be thinking about the maltier, lower gravity styles. So maybe basing something on a dark mild, or a Scottish ale or something like that. Something that plays up the malt in that kind of gravity range. But I would still have similar grain bill. Um, I think if you play up the body and the residual sugar, the residual sweetness of the beer, it tends to make it seem more substantial. Uh, it depends on how sweet you want it, because really, um, if you have a higher finishing gravity, what you're really doing is drinking as sugar what would have become alcohol if it fermented. So you can make a beer more lower alcohol by doing that. I'm not sure that would necessarily make it a session beer, because the beers with more residual sweetness tend to be harder to sort of pound. So I would look to some of the styles that are in the amber to brown range in the gravities that would be suitable. So I would think, Scottish ales, mild, things like that.
Jack Smiths and Austin Goff both asked about the spruce beer mentioned in Brewing Better Beer. And Jack asked about that. Now, Austin said, I had beer from Shorts here in Michigan last night that was fermented with blue spruce tips. Any suggestions on procuring the spruce? And you do address that in the book.
I do, and that was kind of a long write up in there, because this friend of mine from Alaska, Pete DeVeris, did a wonderful talk on spruce um, at the National Homebrewers Conference the year it was in Vegas, and I basically did exactly what he said. It turned out wonderful, but the Reader's Digest version of that is procuring them. So it's number one: do you have a tree? You probably don't have many of those down your way, but I've got a few in my backyard. So I basically go out and I wait for the new growth. Um, It'll be the very pale green tips that'll just sort of pop out. And you go out and you just sort of like, pinch them off with your fingers. They wind up being something that, might be the size of your pinky or shorter. And, it takes some time and you fill up, just take a bucket with you and start filling them up. And then, use those in brewing. But it's a totally different flavor that you get out of fresh spruce tips than if you used, if you went to a homebrew store and found like some spruce extract, because they're probably like, chipping up some wood or something. Fresh spruce tips have a wonderful citrusy flavor to them. It's not all about bark, this sort of heavy flavor. It's really actually delicious. I actually dug out. I saw one of the questions on Facebook and said, like, how did that age? I actually found like the last of that batch, and I probably made that in 2006. So this is like a 6.5-year-old beer. So thanks to the person that said, "What's that like?" Because I'm drinking it right now and it's delicious. So that held up, and yeah, a beer like that, it falls in that category of something that would be suitable. That one had molasses in it because I can still sort of taste that.
And that was the your take on the Ben Franklin beer, was that right?
Yeah, exactly. They, when it came out that year, the recipe was all over. But I actually read the article, and he talked about some simplifications he made from what he had intended to do. So I tried to actually put together a recipe that fit more the beer that he was describing in the article, not the actual recipe that he furnished. So that's where I was using the spruce and the molasses and stuff in with it.
Lots of questions about spices. Lots of questions about spice combinations. How the ways to find the best spice combinations, or what are the bad spice combinations? I guess one thing you could do is look toward the food world and look at recipes, cooking recipes, to see what spices go together.
Yeah, think about things like Christmas cookies or, English puddings for, the Christmas puddings. What's in that? What spices? What flavorings? But, if you think about ahead of time, like I talked about, you can fiddle around with that as well.
So making a tea, you can make the tea and taste it right there, and maybe even do a little blend with some already produced beer and see how that matches.
As I was saying, you don't have to do that until after the beer is actually fermented. So I mean, you can pull off a pint from your car and just use that for experiments. I mean, if you have this whole container of this spice tea, I mean, don't dump all of that in your pint. Just dump a little bit in and see, does it work? So definitely experiment with it. But yeah, I would start with like you said, the food world. I would be a little leery of using too much clove, because clove is like the phenolic off flavor in beer. It tells a lot of people that are familiar with beer that something's wrong with it, and you kind of have to overcome that when you're drinking it. It's like, oh yeah, there's clove in it, and that's intentional. That's not like a wild yeast infection. So I would be careful about that, because I've had that in my pumpkin beers. That's been a change that I've made. I've just eliminated it entirely.
What about nuts? Greg Nelson asks about how to add nuts to avoid excessive oils.
I don't tend to use nuts in my beer. I guess I would look for dry roasted fresh ones. Maybe toast them in the oven a little to see if oils come out of it, and maybe toss them in paper towels. When they're done, trying to get anything out of them. But Yeah, I don't do nut beers really.
I tried I did just a very small batch. We're talking like 3 quarts for a video episode one time where we had been using small batch barley wines to put in, like we used it to make a fruit cake and soak the fruit cake in that barley wine. And the next year I said, oh well, if fruit cake and barley wine go together, I'll put all the ingredients from a fruit cake in a barley wine. So including the candied fruit, the molasses, the brown sugar, the spices, everything, including pecans, which I roasted in the oven and I chopped up. And I'm not sure what they did except bob on the top of the wort. So
Yeah, I mean, I would tend to like, you know, crush them up and, either limit the contact time. You might try to treat them like oak or something like that. Have a way of bagging it or containing it and, taste it, um, with the contact time and see if it's adding something. But um, yeah, the the oils in nuts and chocolate and things like that always kind of concern me. So I tend to get those flavors elsewhere. I also tend, for spices, I tend not to use them raw in the secondary. And this is another kind of cooking analogy. I don't like a raw spice flavor. If you ever make Indian food or something, it would taste totally different if you like added all those spices to the finished dish than if you heated the spices up in oil at the start and developed the flavors. So when I make a tea out of spices, I'm hitting it with some heat. When I'm putting the spices in at the end of the boil, it's getting that heat. I think sometimes if you just throw the spices in raw and this cold in the secondary, you get the rawness and oftentimes some of the tannin out of the spices themselves. They wind up tasting sort of dusty or woody. So I tend to avoid doing that as well. I usually either add the spices at the very end of the boil, or I make that tea, or both. Like I said, go subtle with what's in the boil, and then, when you're getting ready to keg it or package it, that's where you taste it and do the little tune-up with whatever additional spices you think it might need. Because you can always add more, but taking it out, that's tough. You just put it in the back and forget about it a year and see how it is next year.
No, that answers probably what's going to be our last question from John Petrocelli. Is there any reason to spice a beer during the boil instead of the keg by making a tea of the spices in boiling water? Or he mentions, and the reason I'm repeating the question, a vodka infusion. So have you used spices with a vodka infusion?
No, but that's kind of a Randy Mosier trick. See, I make I use the boiling water, not the alcohol. But I guess it depends on what your goals are. Mine would tend to lower the gravity a little bit, and his would tend to bump it up. So, depends on what your beer needs. I think technically some chemical compounds are alcohol soluble, so maybe you get more out of them when you soak them in vodka. But I kind of like the make a tea approach because that's often like the potpourri at Christmas time. It's just the spices in some water, mulling spices, sitting there simmering on the stove and just making everything smell good. So I'm kind of going for that when I think spices, but you don't want your beer to be a spice bomb. I mean, you want to know that there's some spices there, but you don't want that to be kind of the first thing you get. I mean, you want to say, oh, that's a nicely malty beer, and ooh, look, there's that nice kind of accent to it. So that's kind of what I go for, but that's my. I mean, some people might like the more aggressive character. So, let your palate be the guide. And if you give it to your friends and, pay attention to their reactions, uh, use that field research. And if you're hitting the spices too hard, pay attention and back off in subsequent years.
Well, there you go. I think we could go on for another hour, but I appreciate your time. The book is wonderful, and I might just steal this recipe and kind of modify it a little bit, make it my own. And
with the spices, I'd advise you to try the tea approach with it, and see if you like the balance. Because you might favor sort of a different take on it. So do it to your own taste, and that's kind of a great way to take an existing recipe and personalize it.
Well, there you go. Well, Gordon, I appreciate it. I hope you have a happy holiday season coming up. I can't believe it's coming up so soon. But if I don't talk to you, we should find another excuse to get together again on the show. But if I don't see you before then, I'll definitely see you in Philadelphia, right?
Yeah, so I will absolutely be in Philadelphia. It's a 9-hour drive for me, but that way I can bring some kegs.
There you go. Well, thanks, Gordon.
My pleasure.
Thanks again to Gordon and to everybody who submitted questions. It's good to get practical tips and tricks, but it's also good to step back and look at the big picture every now and then. And Gordon's book is a great opportunity for you to do that. I hope you have a great Thanksgiving next week, and if your country doesn't celebrate Thanksgiving, eat a bunch, argue with your relatives, and pass out on the couch watching a sporting event. Then, when you wake up, eat a bunch more. And there you go. That's... There's a little more to it than that, but then the next day go out and get trampled shopping. Or buy our new logbook on the website. Be sure to check out our DVDs, Extract Brewing and Partial Mashing, Stepping into All Grain, Low-Tech Lagering, Decoction Mashing, and Introduction to Wine Kits. You can find them all on our website, along with our new perpetual version of our Brewer's Logbook. That'll be on the week after Thanksgiving. We got combo deals to save you a few bucks if you want to buy more than one DVD at a time, and you can check out our Basic Brewing shirts in the store, too. You can see a listing of the fine folks across the country who sell our DVDs on basicbrewing.com. And if there isn't a vendor in your area, you can order them online at our online shop at basicbrewingshop.com. Thanks to everybody who's continued to click on our Amazon.com link. We appreciate the support there. Our featured products this week that were purchased through the link are Fisher-Price Musical Projection Swing and Beer Saver Reusable Silicone, or is it silicone, bottle caps set of 6. It's one of those things that wish I'd thought of. Thanks again, everybody. Remember, I can't tell who bought what, so no worries there. Just click on the Amazon.com logo on our site the next time you feel like Amazon shopping. Would greatly appreciate your support. Don't forget, you can also join the American Homebrewers Association and subscribe to Brew Your Own magazine through the associate links on basicbrewing.com as well. That's all until 2 weeks from now. Until then, happy Thanksgiving, everybody. Thank you for listening. I'm James Spencer. Production help for Basic Brewing Radio and our website is provided by Kelly Dodson. Basic Brewing Radio is a production of Active Voicing. We'll talk to you next time, everybody. So long.